Aloha everyone and welcome back to the Ben 10 Retrospectives, and today we're going to be talking about the second episode in the original Ben 10 series, Washington, B.C. And admittedly it's a lot sillier than I remembered it. Not to say that it wasn't silly when I first saw it, but I thought it was a little bit more serious, but in retrospect I'm kind of wondering why I even thought that in the first place. Mostly because of the villain, but pretty much anyways, pretty much my reaction to it now is kind of my reaction toward it when I first saw it. I thought it was good for what it was, but I honestly felt that there was just something not quite right about it, and now I kind of see that that was actually its tone, which mostly consists of its villain, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not really, it's not a bad thing. I do enjoy the villain of this episode, but it's definitely it was noticeable. So I might as well talk about the plot for the episode, and this pretty much follows. Well, I actually don't really know if it does, but Ben is now starting out as a hero, so he's getting more into it. He's saving people, catching robbers, doing all this hero stuff. But in the midst of it all, he wants what any kid who does anything wants: a reward. In this case, it's a gold Sumo Slimer card, and every chance he wants to try and get it, he's denied in some way. Wait, and so as a result, it becomes his goal. But in the meanwhile, there's a mad scientist by the name of Dr. Animo that's running around. He has created a machine that is able to mutate animals into vicious monsters, and then after getting enough components, he's able to find a way to reanimate dead animals from prehistoric times. Hence the name Washington, B.C. So Ben ultimately has to fight Dr. Animo, while also trying to learn that being a hero is its own reward. So honestly, what did I know? Some of the things that I noticed about watching this episode is, well, Ben as a hero. What I like about this episode is that it shows some of the stuff that how Ben works. Now, I've said last time that he is a good-natured goof and that he does have an attitude and such, but this kind of further exemplifies what kind of a superhero he is. Like I mentioned before in the last video, how he is creative with what he can do with his aliens. Well, this episode actually further exemplifies what kind of that he can be creative even without his aliens, and also that he's still a kid. Like, one scene that I think that actually can serve as a dual purpose for my points is a scene in the first act. I've mentioned how Ben wanted to look for a Gold Sumo Slimer card throughout this episode. Well, during the first act, his grandfather and his cousin are shopping at a Megalomart, which is supposed to have everything. He finds a bunch of cereal boxes where they're each supposed to have a Sumo Slimer card in them. So Ben decides to go hero and pretty much do dumpster diving with the cereal boxes until he can find the one he wants. This actually introduces another one of Ben's heroes into the fray, Gray Matter, which his usability is kind of iffy, but that's for another discussion. But it also kind of shows that despite Ben's good attitude and heart, he's still a kid. That despite the fact that he wants to use his powers to help people and save lives, he is not above abusing them. Which let's be honest, a lot of kids would do if they got powered. Like, regardless of what kind of a kid you are. Like, if you're a good kid, you listen to your parents, or if you're a bad kid or something, if you got superpowers, then odds are you're going to abuse the hell out of them. Which actually makes sense because imagine if this nerdy kid who reads superhero comics and then suddenly gets powers and decides he wants to be a hero. Do you think that for a second that he would not use his powers to get back at his school bullies or whatever? Oh, sorry, lighting outside. Or even if you got power, is there any, if as a kid, would you have misused your powers in any way to get something that you wanted? Which actually makes sense for his character. It helped, and ironically it actually kind of helped, and it does add to what the overall tone of the message of the episode is, that being a hero is its own reward, which helps mirror the villain in this piece, Dr. Animo, because I meant how Ben wants his Gold Sumo Slammer card. Dr. Animo has his own target, which I'll get into when I actually talk about Dr. Animo. But the other point of the scene is this: because of this, when Ben transforms back, his Omnitrix needs to recharge, and this is actually another thing that we established with it, that every time Ben transforms, the Omnitrix needs to recharge. So whenever he goes hero and transforms back, he can't just immediately jump from one hero to the next because it takes a while, because the Omnitrix needs to recharge, which actually establishes another point about the episode, that the Omnitrix doesn't always work. But again, I'm getting off topic. So when it's recharging, the villain of the piece, Dr. Ammo, attacks the Mega Mart because it has components that he needs, which he learned because the TV happened to be on, which is always a nice Deus Ex Machina on television. But it's kind of fun. It's fun because, and while Ben can't go hero, he gets creative in this. His grandfather and cousin are being chased by a giant hamster. He grabs a scooter, throws balls at it. It actually shows how creative he can be, because despite the fact that he can't use his superpowers, he still does something. He grabs a scooter, balls, and whatever he can use at the time, and uses the materials around him to fight off this hamster. And it shows that despite how Ben is kind of a goof, and even how he isn't always the brightest bulb, he is smart in his own way, and he does know what he's doing. It's just that, again, he's a kid, so there's still a learning curve for him. But this episode also is nice because it helped introduce other heroes that Ben used, which is something I forgot to mention in the last video, that we get, well, kind of, but in the last episode we were able to see Ben transform into 4 of his heroes. Here we get to see the introduction of 3 more, though with only one of them named in this episode. And I do like the message and how well it kind of is honed down, which I mentioned before, that being a hero is its own reward, which also is a nice thing that the show does. That just because, again, Ben is a kid, he's arrogant, he likes to misuse his powers, but throughout the series he learns how to use his powers more and more, actually becomes more of a willing hero, and not just some kid with a watch. But it works a nice, and the message works a nice parallel with the villain, Dr. Animo. And now I really want to talk about Dr. Animo. This guy is all over the place, and not in the bad way. Like, here's the thing. His backstory is that he was apparently a promising medicine doctor, but his research consisted of experimenting on animals, and which cost him an award that he was trying to win, called the Verities Award, which caused him to freak out and become the villain here. And it's kind of nice because it works as a parallel to Ben, because it's a nice parallel between Ben and the villain. and how they both have to learn they're both dealing with similar circumstances, but Ben is able to realize that he doesn't need what he's aiming for, while Animo by the end of the episode is just raving, saying, I deserve it. But as a villain, Dr. Animo is loud and he does not like subtlety. In fact, I think he's the antithesis of subtlety, because I mentioned before how he came to the store that Ben, Gwen, and their grandfather were going to, because the reason was there was because he happened to see a commercial that said that they have all this stuff. They have a wide selection of technology, food, and so on, and he needs a few components for his machine so that it can reanimate dead cells. So he decides to go in on top of a giant frog and steal them. And it's at that point where I realize that Dr. Animo is not subtle, and it is further emphasized throughout the entirety of the series. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because it's enjoyable to watch him go nuts and all out, but Dr. Animo does not like subtlety in any way, shape, or form. And again, with the scene at the mart, he could have easily gone into the store and just purchased these things that he wanted and then left. It would have made it so that by the time he enacted his evil schemes to do what he wanted, he would not be found. The Tennysons wouldn't know what he wanted. They would not realize it until it was too late. Honestly, he could have saved himself a lot of trouble if he hadn't jumped into the store on top of his frog and caused a scene. But that is exactly what makes him cool and fun to watch. He is not subtle. He's the villain that goes all out without being too serious, and it is just so much fun to watch. In fact, again, and it's even further exemplified in his first scene, because he loves making puns or wordplay, and it's painful in all the right ways. Like when he first makes his giant frog, he makes it eat his landlord, and he says, I'm sorry, I can't hear you, I think you've got a frog in your throat, or is that the other way around? And he makes more puns like that. The episode title, he drops it once, and because he thinks it's funny, he says prehistory. He just loves. It's obvious that he just wants to be over the top. And it's really kind of fun to watch, and it's really just amusing to watch, and it's a trait that I'm glad that I think is actually downplayed in later series, but honestly, it's just really fun to watch this over the top villain, and it actually works as a nice thing to work off of Ben. So, anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about. Honestly, I don't think there's really much more that I can talk about with this episode. I think I like Dr. Animo as the villain. I like the overall message. The action is still rather cool. I like that we get to see more aliens, and yeah, that's it. Oh yeah, there's two more things actually I could talk about, and they're both, and one's about Gwen, one's about Grandpa Max. Like in this episode, we can see that Gwen can handle herself a bit more, though not to the same degree as Ben because of lack of powers. But there was one scene where where she and her grandfather are being attacked by a giant canary while Ben is fighting a mammoth. It makes sense in context. And the first thing she manages to grab a spear and fend off the parakeet, which is not much now, but it does get expanded upon. And this is actually something I forgot to mention in the first video. Here we actually do learn what Max's profession was when he was younger, that he was apparently a plumber, though from his speech pattern it does kind of leave things open, and it is expanded upon in later episodes, because there's a scene where he mentions when they're tracing the parakeet, he mentions how this was like the good old days, but when he's questioned by Gwen, he gets defensive and acts like thinks that this is not right and tries covering it up. And it actually is a nice hint. And they did the same thing in the first episode, but I forgot to mention it because I was mostly talking about how they were trying to set up the series, and but honestly, I think that's really all I can talk about for this episode. I think there's good action. I liked the villain because of just how over the top he is. We further expand Ben's character. We get a nice moral, and overall, I still think this is a good episode, but it definitely is goofy. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And so thank you for watching. This has been the Ben 10 Retrospectives, and tune in next week where we look at the next episode of the series. And I'm Samuel Johnson, and I will see you later. Take care.